Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today I'm going to be going over another way to use the tools inside of Cinema 4D for a 2D workflow. So for those of you that are used to working in After Effects and are just trying to get into Cinema 4D and trying to learn what kind of tools will help you in your workflow, this is what I'm going to be going over today. So the tool I'm going to be going over is the Collision Deformer. Now the Collision Deformer is very, very useful. It is a way to kind of fake soft-body dynamics, get the same kind of soft-body collisions where things kind of like squash and stretch and stuff like that. And that's exactly what I'm going to be demonstrating, is using the Collision Deformer to fake soft-body collisions and to create your own little squash and stretch kind of animation. So you can see on the screen right now that I have these two little dudes, and the mallet comes down and smacks the one over the head. And you can see that the little mole guy gets kind of squashed down, and then he shakes it off and he kind of pops back to his original form. And that's all with the Collision Deformer. So that's what I'm going to be going breaking down, is how to use this and how I use the Collision Deformer in my 2D workflow to do a little bit of squash and stretch. So let's go. Alright, so here is my scene, and I have a hammer, got my little Donkey Kong mallet, and we're going to squash this poor little sphere here. So again, I'm always looking out to see how we can use Cinema 4D tools to really enhance and create really cool 2D kind of animations and stuff, and things that if you tried to do it in After Effects, it would take a lot longer than doing in Cinema 4D. And a lot of Cinema 4D's tools really lends itself to just trying to keep everything you can possibly do for 2D style workflows and everything, to just keep it inside of Cinema 4D. And this is one of those things that if you wanted to have something squash something else, I mean, the first thing you'd probably go for is, all right, well, let's do soft bodies or something like that. But dynamics are kind of tricky for someone that might not be used to them, if someone's coming from After Effects or something else and not totally used to how Cinema 4D works. But what I'm going to be showing today is a deformer that actually a combination of deformers that I always like to use. And the main one that I'm going to be going over is this Collision Deformer. Now, what a Collision Deformer does is it allows one object to collide into and deform another object. So it's very aptly named. And what I'm going to do just to demonstrate this is, to get a deformer to work, you first need to figure out, all right, which object do you want to deform? And right now I want to squash this little sphere right here. So I'm going to make the Collision Deformer a child of that sphere. So now what's going to happen is you have this Collision Deformer and you have all of these options here. So under Object, you have Fall Off, so you can actually control fall off of how this affects your object and restores shape. But the main one we need to go over first is this Colliders tab. And this is where you define what object you want to collide into your object that you have the Collision Deformer applied to. And so we actually need this hammer, this mallet, to be the one that is in this Collider solver. So what we need to do, and actually what I'm going to do, is just select this little mallet head, this little piece right here, because that's really all I need to actually collide into the sphere. So I'll go and drag and drop that mallet head object, place it right into my solver. And what you'll see is when I actually, if I hit play and just kind of move the mallet down, you'll see that we got something going on. We're kind of squishing it a little bit, and it's kind of clinging to our mallet here. And it kind of looks really odd right now. But what we can do is go into our Colliders tab, and we have all these different kind of solvers. So right now it's just set to intersect, and that basically means that it'll look at the inside and the outside of your object to create this collision. So that's why when it gets close enough, it just kind of it looks more like a water droplet almost, where it's kind of coalescing to the like kind of fusing to the mallet. And that could be cool for some effects. So like if you want to do a water drop type thing, that could be kind of cool. But what I want to do is actually squash it. And what we can do to do that and get that kind of effect is we have these different types of solvers. If you're trying to collide in from inside objects or outside of the objects, and intersect, like I said, just kind of works with both. But what we actually want to do is we want our objects to collide and hit our objects from the outside. So inside is like if something was inside that sphere that was trying to push out, like an alien coming out of your stomach or something like that. Like it would push out of the stomach, and that's really not a really good imagery to have, but that's the first thing that came to mind. But anyways, outside is what we're going to need to do to actually deform from the outside. So our mallet is on the outside of the object, and it's going to smash it down. So we have two options here, just normal outside and outside volume. And I really like to use the outside volume because it actually takes into account that your object, if it has volume, like a sphere, it'll actually take that into account and kind of have it stretch or squash a little bit. So I'm going to take my hammer again after choosing that outside solver, and you can see that now, as I push down on the mallet, we're getting a little bit of this nice kind of squashy thing. And you can see that we're having a little bit of issue just with how this is kind of working. And what we do to fix that is go into the Collision tab, and we're going to go to these advanced options here. Now the few things that are important in here is, number one, the size. And what I'm going to do is just bring my hammer down so we have a little bit of squash. You can actually see what these options are doing as I tweak them. So this size here just defines how much kind of space you have between the collider object and the actual object it's colliding into. So you can see we're giving it a little bit of buffer there, so we don't have any pixels, we don't have any polygons colliding into each other. So we're getting this kind of like a barrier growing. So we're kind of like growing this barrier between our two objects here. So that is pretty handy if you're trying to avoid polygon overlapping or anything like that, or any kind of intersection with any of your objects. So that's very important. The steps just kind of brings up how much evaluations per keyframe here. So it's a more precise kind of calculation. So just like with dynamics, if you up the steps with dynamics, number one, it's going to be a more precise calculation, but number two, you're also going to slow down your viewport here, as you can see. But again, you'll get a more accurate result. So you can see that we're kind of getting a more accurate thing going on, but we're still getting a little bit of issue here. And the thing to keep in mind with this is that if your object collides too far, so you can see that like right in the middle, like halfway down my sphere, if it intersects too much, it'll just kind of get all screwy. So keep that in mind when you're doing the collision deformer, that you want to try to go no more than like halfway on an object. So you can see right here that we're really pushing it, and then all of a sudden, once we go halfway through that object, it just kind of snaps back to its, it just kind of snaps through our geometry there. So steps is very important. Relax just kind of relaxes the geometry more, so you get a little bit more fluctuation in how your object kind of squishes. So let me get to a good point where my mallet actually is kind of affecting the sphere and squashing a little bit. And you can see that we're kind of relaxing the geometry a little bit, so more of our objects kind of relaxing against the mallet head there. If we bring this down to 2, you can see that it's much more tight. Our mesh feels more tighter, and it's not really going up against and conforming to the shape of that bottom mallet as you would if you just increase this relax value. So you can play around with that. I think if value of 5 is pretty good for that. And stretch is just how much stretching you want going on over all of your polygons. So the more stretch, the more kind of ripples you'll kind of get. And you can see right now that actually it's making it squashier. So it's almost like you give it more springs or more give to the object. So you can see that looks pretty good. And right now, just for speeding up the viewport, I'm going to bring down the steps here just so we can speed this up. You guys can see what's going on. So this looks pretty cool with that stretch value. You can really see that we're getting this kind of squash going on. We're having a little bit of issue at the bottom there, and we can actually, let's try to fix what we got going on here. So yeah, the type of geometry, if I go into my shading, you can see with that standard we have polygons very close together, or points very close together at the bottom there. So we're getting that kind of point. What we can do is make it a little bit more uniform. And let's see what looks good here. It's a nice even. I think that might work pretty good. Let's see. Yeah, I think that works a little bit better when we're squashing here. You can kind of play around. I mean, this is just because I'm using a sphere. But hopefully with your objects, you'll have a little bit more evenly spaced polygons and more smooth polygons. So actually, I think this hexahedron works pretty dang good. So there we go. We got a little bit of that going on. And you'll notice that we're kind of getting this crumpling. And you can fix that with... Let me go into my collision here with the stiffness a little bit, so we're not getting those polygons kind of crumpling in on itself. If we relax a little bit, that might fix it too. And then again, probably adjusting the steps is probably a good idea too, just so it's a little bit more accurate simulation. So again, the reason why this is so cool, is the Collision Deformer is so cool, is that you don't have to run a dynamic simulation. It's a lot like the Jiggle Deformer, where you kind of apply dynamic soft body looking things to your objects, but then you can freely move these objects around, you know, and even have, I don't know if that, yep, we can actually move this sphere and animate the sphere jumping into the mallet. So you can have the thing actually jump into the hammer there if you want to. But with dynamics, you can't do that. You need to set your dynamics up, press play, and run a dynamic simulation. You really have no control. You can't keyframe dynamics, really. You can only kind of try to control the dynamic forces, the real-time physics kind of calculations, but this Collision's Deformer is a really good way to do soft bodies and keyframe at the same time. So you're kind of faking soft bodies and have full range of motion on your objects and still get this kind of soft body thing. So speaking of the Jiggle Deformer, one of my personal favorite deformers, I'm going to go ahead and add and stack that on top of our Collision Deformer. So it's very important how this stack works. Is you want your Collision Deformer to calculate, and then your Jiggle Deformer will come after. So make sure you apply your Jiggle Deformer after the collision. And then what we'll do here is, again, press play and see how the Jiggle Deformer kind of works here. You can see that now we're really getting this nice squashy jiggle going on, but again, you're seeing that kind of jagginess going on. That's actually due to the Jiggle Deformer. And the one thing you need to pay attention to is the structural. The structural will try to maintain the polygon structure and that's why we're getting this kind of deformation like that. But if we bring that structural all the way down to 0, it's not going to try to have all these springs try to fold in on itself. We're going to get a more solid kind of object. So now you can see that we're not getting that polygonal crumpling going on. We're just getting this nice little squash and a little bit of stretch going on because of the Jiggle Deformer. So that's really cool. So we can play around with all these different type of values here, the stiffness of your object, and if you want a little bit of drag, so you can see how that kind of works. Our object feels a little bit more stiffer, and there's more drag or more friction there due to our Jiggle Deformer action here. And I actually have a tutorial about the Jiggle Deformer that I will post in this tutorial comments section, so you can check that out as well. I don't want to go too in depth because our main guy is this Collision Deformer here. So the cool thing about another cool thing about the Collision Deformer is we can go to this restore shapes. You'll notice that when an object collides into something else, it'll just go back to and restore its shape. But what if you want it to kind of stay deformed based on that object that ran into it and just kind of stay squashed? So what we can do is actually, we can do that, and we just turn down this restore shape, and then we can go and use this hammer, and you'll see that, bam, we just squashed it and it stayed squashed. So, and that's all due to this restore shape. So if you have 0% restore shape, what's going to happen is you're going to squash your object, and you're going to collide and deform your object, and it's just going to stay that way. But if you actually just give it a little bit, like maybe 10%, what you'll find is that you'll squash it and it will slowly return back to its shape and restore its own shape. So you can have a lot of fun with that setting there. And messing around with the restore shape settings, you can see that kind of squashes, and then now it's kind of almost inflating back up to its original state there. So again, really, really cool. One thing you'll notice though, as you can see, we're still getting that kind of weird jagginess, all the polygon deformation going on. And what I like to do to smooth that out is actually use another deformer, and that is the Smoothing Deformer. And again, we're going to place this in our deformer stack after the jiggle, and then what that's going to do is just kind of smooth out our geometry based on our options here. So we can see if we deform this, we have a much smoother mesh. We don't have those little polygonal jaggies anymore or anything like that. And this is the basics for the GIF that I showed you off the top there, where I have a hammer slamming down. But the thing is with that one is I actually keyframe the Collision Deformer restore shape. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to animate this guy. So let's see if I can do some Cappuccino here. So Cappuccino is kind of a way to real-time create keyframes, and I have a tutorial on this as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to record the position, scale, and rotation. Actually, let's just do position. And what it's going to do is when I hit start real time, what it's going to do is going to record all the movements I do in my viewport here. So I'm going to have this come down and then go back up. And what that just did is it created keyframes for all of those things, which is pretty cool. And you can see it's a little bit jaggy. What I can do, sorry about that, guys. What I can do is go into my timeline, and I can stretch that out a little bit. And go to my keys, and let's see. There is an option here to smooth everything out. Where is it? Key. Let's see. Maybe it's if I select all these. There is a key reducer right there. Why won't you show up? Let's see. Okay, so we actually have to select the tracks. You can see that I'm doing this on the fly. But there's a key reducer. And what I'll do is unfold all of my keyframes there. And what we can do is just adjust and click in these values, and that'll actually reduce the keyframes, and this will kind of smooth everything out a little bit there. So you can see that we're kind of simplifying our keyframes and smoothing everything out. So that's a really nice smooth track there, and what we can do is kind of make everything soft, and that's a little bit of Cappuccino and keyframe reduction on the fly there. I can post a more in-depth tutorial on that in the comments, but you can see that, alright, that's good enough. But you can see that we have it squashed, and then what we're going to do is actually keyframe. Let me get this Cappuccino window out of the way. What I'm going to do is keyframe that restore shape. So I'm going to slam the hammer down, it's going to stay squashed, and I'm going to hit stop. And I'm going to set a keyframe for restore state, maybe go 5 keyframes ahead, and then bring the restore shape all the way up to 100. And what you'll notice is I'll hit play. We have the squash going on, and then here are our restore shape keyframes. You can see that our object kind of popped right back into its space, and it even had a little bit of springiness due to the jiggle deformer. So this is kind of like a perfect combination with the Collision Deformer, and then adding the jiggle on top of that to create this nice overshoot and like squash and stretch kind of animation, and then the Smoothing Deformer just to smooth out all of our geometry that does get deformed by that Collision Deformer. So with those three things, that's actually how I created the animation that I showed off the top, where, let me turn this off, where I have my little dude down here, and he's looking around, he gets smacked by the hammer, and you can see that I keyframed the restore shape here, so my little guy just kind of pops and back into place after he shakes his head and pop. So very nice cartoony kind of effect where something gets hit and it stays squashed like that, stays deformed, and then he shakes it off. He's a champ, and he just goes back to his original state there. And that's all, again, due to the Collision Deformer. Restore shape keyframed. We add a little bit of jiggle to the collision, so it's a little bit more springy, kind of eased in, eased out kind of motions going on, and then smoothed out all of our geometry by using this Smooth Deformer here. And you can see that if you smooth it out too much, we got problems, but you only want to, less is more kind of thing with the Smoothing Deformer. You can see we still have a little bit of jiggles there, so you want to, it's a little balancing act you have to pull here for this to look good. But this is also for a little capsule object here, so whatever you want to deform might be a little bit different, but at least you are equipped with the knowledge to try to adapt all of these Collision Deformer, the Jiggle Deformer, and the Smoothing Deformer to get what you get the kind of look that you want. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Just like I said, if you try, I really encourage you to try this on your own objects. I really love seeing what you guys come up with. So post them on Twitter, hit me on Twitter, whatever, wherever I am. Just post your stuff, show your work. It's the only way you'll get better is if you get feedback and get see what you're doing right, see what you're doing wrong, and then grow from that. So I really encourage you to show everything you're making. Try this on your own work and have fun most of all. So again, Collision Deformer, really cool in emulating and simulating kind of soft body like stuff. And that'll do it for me. But thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye guys.